Hello, I'm Josh Cunnings with EnviroNews. It's very rare for us to report on an issue outside of the environment, energy, and human health arenas. But once in a while, an issue comes along that is so egregious that we simply cannot ignore the need to discuss it. Today, that particular issue is the passage by the Senate of Senate Bill 1867 in a landslide 93-7 vote late last Thursday night. The bill, also known as the National Defense Authorization Act, now goes to conference before moving into the Republican-controlled Congress for a vote where it will likely pass. The National Defense Authorization Act is a piece of legislation passed annually that authorizes funding of our military activities worldwide. What makes this year's passage of the Act so monumentally disturbing is the deplorable and downright sneaky language that has been authored into the bill by Senators John McCain, a Republican, and Carl Levin, a Democrat. This frightening language, carefully crafted into sections 1031 and 1032, is being labeled as a fascist and totalitarian assault on the Bill of Rights, which has prompted the call for immediate resignation of both McCain and Levin by constitutional law experts, military personnel, and everyday citizens alike. The bill also violates the Posse Comitatus Act, which prohibits American military personnel from engaging in police actions against U.S. citizens on non-federal lands. It is being called the most traitorous act in the history of the Senate, and while the language has been cleverly manipulated to appear almost benign, authorities in constitutional law claim that the threat posed to the rights of American citizens is very real indeed. This bill's controversial language extends the U.S. military's power to detain U.S. citizens on U.S. soil without even ever filing charges. They can then be detained in secret military prisons such as Guantanamo indefinitely without any due process or opportunity for a trial by jury. Our own tax-funded military would be granted unchecked power to arrest, detain, interrogate, and even assassinate any U.S. citizen they deem as a threat with total impunity. In other words, the instantaneous creation of a military police state within our own borders. I know it sounds almost unbelievable, but if you think that I'm making this up, here is what Craig Paul Roberts, a former Reagan administration official, had to say about it on RT America.
What we're talking about is an amendment to the Defense Authorization Bill, which permits the United States government to use the military in violation of the Posse Comitatus Act, which has been in place since 1876, and to use the military to arrest American citizens and hold them in indefinite detention with no recourse to courts of law. Now, this constitutes the repeal of the United States Constitution. And when you find that we have 60 members of the elected Congress who have supported this, then what we see is the United States is on its way to being a police state. Only 2 Republicans in the Senate voted against this amendment. Only 2. So what do we know? We now have a Republican Party that is a Gestapo party. It is in favor of the United States military arresting American citizens and putting them in concentration camps. And that's what's happening right now before us, in front of our eyes. Homeland Security hasn't caught a single terrorist. There's no terrorist activity in the United States. Therefore, there's no basis for this type of a response. There's some other agenda going. And I think what it is to shut down the critics of government, because the critics of government are
Paul,
now
I'm sorry, we're running out of time there. Thank you so much for your thoughts on this.
Why? Why does a simple and routine act passed annually by our elected officials now contain convoluted language that will extend our own military's power to unprecedented new heights? Is it because they fear that the flourishing Occupy movement has become a runaway train that cannot be stopped without the immediate installation of a fascist Gestapo-like police state? Or could it be due to the fact that the European economy, and in turn the entire world economy, is now teetering on the brink of total collapse? and our government is afraid of the madness and mayhem that would inevitably ensue if the dollar becomes worthless? Or could it have anything to do with the massive impending energy and climate crises that are currently facing the entire planet as we speak? If this abominable act passes Congress and is not vetoed by the President, we could very well see tanks and military brigades rolling into our town squares across the country, destroying Occupy movements and other legitimate civil dissent, and squashing our rights to assemble and conduct free speech. That's what SB 1867 authorizes our military to do. This is a recipe for us to see scenes reminiscent of Tiananmen Square right here on U.S. soil. Assuming the legislation gets out of conference intact and passes Congress, this horrific bill puts President Obama in a very difficult position. This is a highly complex issue, and although he has expressed dissatisfaction with the bill because it would micromanage the fight against terrorism, a veto by the President's pen would mean that American military operations around the world would be completely cut off from all funding, leaving our international military infrastructure impotent. Essentially, in order to stop these traitorous shenanigans by a few power-hungry military elitists in the Senate, the President would be forced to leave U.S. soldiers abroad in a very vulnerable position. Thus far, there appears to be a near 100% blackout on this pressing issue by our country's mainstream media outlets. Bill O'Reilly, Sean Hannity, Anderson Cooper, and even an anchor as progressive as Rachel Maddow have so far remained silent on this issue of monumental importance to all Americans. They appear to be content talking about a child-molesting creep at Penn State or Herman Cain's most recent sex scandal, when right before us all lies a piece of legislation that would effectively wipe out the Bill of Rights in this country, resulting in a wholesale destruction of democracy as we know it. This story should be the most talked about issue in the news today, yet most Americans remain oblivious to the fact that Congress is voting to snatch up all of our rights in the middle of the night, quietly and secretly destroying our liberties of free speech and trial by jury. I find it very ironic that the best coverage we have found on this issue so far comes from a Russian television network, while for some mysterious reason, an attempt to essentially repeal the Constitution and all of our subsequent rights directly under our noses doesn't seem to interest the major news networks at all. Again, here's what Paul Craig Roberts on Russia Today had to say.
The Defense Authorization Bill, which allows the U.S. military to pick up people in every country of the world, which includes China and Russia and the United States, and hold them indefinitely, then we're talking about something that's far greater than a torture policy. We're talking about the repeal of the United States Constitution. And what we see from the vote against the amendment by Rand Paul, the Republican senator from Kentucky, to exempt American citizens from this amendment to the Defense Authorization Bill that would allow the military to simply pick up any American citizen anywhere on earth and hold them indefinitely without charges. What we see is that Rand Paul's amendment got voted down by the U.S. Senate. So we have the U.S. Senate consisting of all except 2 Republicans plus 15 Democrats voting to repeal the United States Constitution.
Activists and political experts nationwide are strongly urging folks to contact their federal congressman and the White House to express their outrage in an effort to stop this catastrophic annihilation of freedom from becoming law. And I urge you to visit EnviroNews.tv and subscribe in order to remain directly connected to our ongoing coverage of this mind-boggling story. For EnviroNews USA, I'm Josh Cunnings.